I start the recording.
Thank you.
So hello and welcome everyone to this webinar about the general principles for coding of medication errors and other types of deviations from the labeled medicinal product use. I'm Karen Wilson and work as a medical officer at the MSSO. I will be your instructor today and I'm supported by my colleague Jane Knight, who was speaking to you before. So together we will take you through this webinar, which will last for about 2 hours. We would like to make this webinar interactive as possible. So please submit your questions or send us your comments, and I will allow as much time as possible for questions both during the course and also at the end of the presentation. But just a reminder, don't raise specific coding questions as we can't help you with individual verbatim terms you came across. We will rather guide you in terms of coding principles. Now let's start with the presentation. You all know that ICH adopted the development of MedDRA in the mid-1990s and then became the owner of the terminology. ICH then, on contract, appointed the MSSO to take care of the maintenance and further development of the terminology based on user feedback, also to provide and organize corresponding training, and last but not least, to administer the MedDRA licenses. And all these MSSO activities are overseen by the ICH MedDRA Management Committee. ICH is not only the owner of MedDRA itself, but also owns this training material, so it is protected worldwide. You may use the slides with the exception of the MedDRA and ICH logos, but will have to clearly indicate that ICH owns the copyright. Also, any adaptations of the slides have to be clearly labeled. The second bullet point on the slide refers to warranty and liability issues you should be aware of, and the third bullet point is not relevant for today. Now let me provide you with an overview on what we will cover in this webinar. At first, we will explore the regulatory background for today's topic. We will then discuss definitions and terminologies for product use concepts based on the ICH guidance documents. After that, we will look into the general principles for coding of medication errors, and then apply these principles in exercises using the MedDRA browser. And we will conclude with a question and answer session, as mentioned already. But we will address your questions throughout the session as well. This slide now explains about the quiz questions, the polling that we will use during this webinar. The easiest way to join these activities is to scan this QR code with your smartphone, and it will bring you directly to the poll. And as soon as I activate the first question, you'll be able to see it and respond. Or alternatively, you may enter the indicated web address, pollf.com, into the URL bar at the top of your internet browser in your computer, tablet, or cell phone. It will then take you to this log on screen here, and you'll be asked for a username. The poll is completely anonymous, so you don't need to enter your name, but please enter my credentials, that is Carol N. Wills 584, and with no spaces, and then click join. Nothing else to be entered. I just leave this on the screen for a moment so that you can enter the required information or scan this QR code, but you will be able to see these credentials on each slide that relates to the quizzes. And Jane has put this information in the chat as well. And just to let you know, so if you lose connection to the poll during the session, just let us know, because I can also show the QR code in between. Now let's see whether it works. Nobody has responded yet. Yeah, now you're coming. Spain, I see Spain, buenos días, buongiorno to Italy. Oh, I see Africa. I think it's I think it's Niger, South Africa, Democratic Republic of Congo. I see Saudi Arabia, Egypt, many Balkan countries, so many green dots I cannot recognize anymore. Central America is there. What is it? Is it Costa Rica? It's too small. Buenos dias. India is with us, China, Philippines, Australia, New Zealand. So we have a global attendance here, Iceland. So warm welcome to everyone and nice to meet you all. Seems to work. So now let's get started with our topic today. And our topic is medication errors and other product use issues. And we will first look into the regulatory background because this is an important topic that is in focus of many regulatory authorities around the world. Medication errors are a critical and important problem in healthcare. And they are not only of great importance for the patients concerned, but also have a huge impact on healthcare costs, of course. They represent the most frequent preventable reason for adverse events in the use of medicinal products. And since they are actually preventable, they are in the focus of regulatory authorities. Depending on countries and regions, they support the recording, coding, reporting, and evaluation of these errors in order to gain new insights into the extent and also causes of medication errors. With the intention, of course, to develop improved strategies for their prevention to better protect patient safety, but also to reduce healthcare costs, because the costs associated with medication errors could be much better used, much better invested in other areas of the healthcare system. The fact that medication errors are in the focus of regulatory authorities is also reflected by new guidances that have been published or are in preparation. You may already be familiar, if you live in Europe, with a good practice guide on recording, coding, reporting, and assessing medication errors of the European Medicines Agency. Just one example. Also, the FDA has published various guidance documents to help avoid medication errors. And you can see some of them here, like safety considerations for product design to minimize medication errors, or safety considerations for container labels and carton labeling design to minimize medication errors, etc. So as stated earlier, regulatory requirements may differ between regions, so make yourself familiar with your local requirements. These are just examples. The regulatory initiatives mentioned have also led to the addition of new terms to MedDRA, together with a restructuring of the hierarchy, with the intent to better support specific coding, but also to better support subsequent data retrieval and assessment of medication errors and other types of product use issues. And they also led to updates and amendments of the relevant points to consider documents, so the ICH coding and data retrieval guidances, to provide more information, more guidance for these coding scenarios. You may think now that this topic is only relevant to the post-marketing sector, but this is not the case. It is also relevant for clinical development, for clinical studies. And just as an example, in May 2021, the FDA and the Reagan-Udall Foundation for the FDA convened a virtual public meeting on the potential medication error risks with investigational drug container labels. The risk of medication errors related to the content and format of the information on the investigational drug container labels was explored. The prevalence and nature of medication errors was explained, and also, of course, the practices that might minimize the potential for such errors were addressed. So the recorded event is still available on the web if you're interested in it. So just to stress that medication errors is not just an issue for post-marketing, but also for the clinical development area. Any questions so far, Jane? If not, I continue.
No questions so far, Caroline. Just no questions so far.
Thank you. As mentioned already, the PTC documents, the points to consider documents, have also been updated and supplemented to provide more guidance and assistance to MedDRA users on this topic. Let us first look at the MedDRA term selection points to consider document. Here the cover page of the latest version of the document that was published in March 2024. And if you look into this document, that is gives operational coding guidance. And if you look into the table of contents, you will see that the guidance for medication errors and other product use issues like misuse, abuse, addiction, plus off-label use, misuse, is quite short. You see that off-label use, just 2 pages, overdose, poisoning, 2 pages, and then the whole area of medication errors, misuse, abuse, addiction, just 9 pages. And this is different with the MedDRA points to consider companion document that provides more detailed information, many more examples, and guidance on medication errors and the other types of product use concepts. This is a living document that is updated as needed, meaning that it is not newly released on 1st of March of each year, like the PTC document for MedDRA term selection. And the latest release is release 2.0, and it was released in October 2020, as you can see here. Here you really find much more detailed explanations and instructions. And I can only highly recommend taking a close look at these 25 pages. The information that you get there is really very helpful to better understand the terminology and also the classification of such events with many, many practical examples. And the PTC working group, just to let you know, is preparing the release of a new version of the document, the companion document, with some amendments to the medication error section at first, but also they are preparing a new chapter that addresses the distribution, manufacturing, and quality system issues, meaning product quality issues that are caused before the medicinal product reaches the actual medication process. So watch out for this new version of the companion document. It will be released during this year. Now let me shortly show you where to find these documents and switch to the MedDRA website. Here we are. And if you choose how to use and support documentation, you will be brought to this screen now. And here are the points to consider documents in MedDRA best practices documents. And here is the MedDRA term selection document in different formats, PDF, Word format, HTML. And you also find a redline version here. So redline means that the changes as compared to the previous version of the document are highlighted. So if you are already familiar with the content of this document, you can just, if a new version is released, you can just refer to the redlined version, because you will be easily be able to identify the changes as compared to the previous version of the document. There's also MedDRA data retrieval and presentation points to consider document for those of you who are working in the more in the evaluation, assessment, analysis area. And here is the companion document, the release 2.0. me switch back to my slides. And before we go into further details, we will have to familiarize ourselves with the terms that refer to medication errors and other product use errors and issues. That's the first thing that we have to do. And here is a definition of the term medication error. A medication error is any accidental and preventable event that may result in the improper use of medication or even harm to the patient, while the medication is under the control of those involved in the medication process, meaning physicians, pharmacists, nurses, patients, consumers, or their families. And the second aspect that is highlighted in green is important to remember. These errors occur during product use in the medication process, when the product is under the control of the healthcare provider, patient, or consumer. The term does not refer to errors that occur during manufacturing or are caused by wholesalers. In other words, outside of the control of the healthcare provider, patient, or consumer. Medication and other product use errors may be related to professional practice, the products themselves, and healthcare processes and systems, including prescribing, communication of orders, product labeling, product packaging and nomenclature, preparation of products and their dispensing, distribution and administration, as well as related education and product monitoring. The points to consider document for MedDRA term selection contains a table in chapter 3.16 where product misuse, abuse, and addiction are addressed. And this table facilitates a high-level classification of product use errors and problems, comparing misuse, abuse, and addiction with the concepts of medication error and off-label use. And three criteria are used for this purpose. Was the deviation intentional, a conscious decision, or did it happen in error? Was it unintentional? And who has caused the event? Who triggered it? The patient or consumer, or a healthcare professional? And did it happen in the context of the therapeutic use of the product, yes or no? So you see that misuse, abuse, addiction are always intentional. They are triggered, caused by patient or consumer. Misuse, we classify something as misuse when such events, intentional conscious decisions by patient or consumer to deviate from the labeled product information occur in the context of the therapeutic use of a product for therapeutic reasons, whereas abuse, addiction are not in the framework of therapeutic use. And here you see medication error is of course not intentional, is accidental, it's an error, can be caused by either the patient, consumer, or healthcare professional, occurs in the context of therapeutic use of the product. Off-label use, again, a conscious decision by a healthcare professional and in the framework of therapeutic use, so for therapeutic reasons. And just a short addition here, so language is not used uniformly on a global level. So in some countries, in some languages, misuse may not always include the concept of therapeutic use. So misuse, abuse may be used as quasi-synonyms in some languages, like in German, for instance. Now let me illustrate these scenarios with some practical examples. Here we have Lisa, and she has stress at work. And in the first scenario, the doctor prescribes 1 tablet of a sleeping pill a night to help her sleep better. But since she is still awake at 3 o'clock in the morning, she decides to take another tablet. So this is a conscious decision on her part, a deviation from the prescribed treatment regimen for therapeutic purposes. And in other words, an intentional misuse of the medication, an intentional drug misuse. In the second scenario, a friend advises her to look for painkillers on the internet to calm down. She orders the medication and takes 1 tablet a day first, but then continuously increases the dose to 4 tablets a day by now. Here we also have a conscious decision by Lisa to take these painkillers to calm down, so she deviates from the actual therapeutic indication and is increasing the dose continuously. She is taking too much of them. So this now constitutes a product abuse, here a drug abuse. In the third scenario, Lisa does not tolerate the sleeping pill. She is dazed after waking up, so the doctor prescribes her a painkiller off-label instead. Here we have a conscious decision by the doctor for therapeutic purposes, and we also know that this is an off-label use for an unapproved indication. An off-label use of the product, the medication. Please note that 3 criteria which are required for the high-level classification as off-label use are met. So it's intentional, conscious decision by a healthcare professional for therapeutic reasons. But for coding purposes, additional information is needed to finally code to an LLT under PT off-label use. And this is really important to remember. Off-label use has to be explicitly mentioned in the verbatim and or in the case report to be able to code this information accordingly. Why? Well, off-label use refers to an unapproved use of an approved drug in a specific country, and this information is not available for coders in most instances. Coders shouldn't make this decision unless off-label use is explicitly reported. And related guidance can be found in both the PTC document for MedDRA term selection and the PTC companion document. Finally, in the fourth scenario, Lisa suffers from forgetfulness due to the stress she is experiencing at her workplace. She also forgets that she has already taken her medication one day and takes it a second time. So this is unintentional, but happens in the context of therapeutic use, and this scenario now represents a medication error. The following flowchart visualizes this decision-making process. Here, at first, the 3 core questions: intentional or unintentional, caused by whom, and in the context of therapeutic use, yes or no. Let us assume that the unapproved product use took place intentionally. This may be decided by healthcare professionals or by a patient consumer. If this is a conscious decision by the healthcare professional and for therapeutic purposes, we classify these events as off-label use. These 3 criteria are required for the high-level classification as an off-label use. But again, please be aware that additional information is needed to finally code to an LLT under PT off-label use. Off-label use terms should only be selected when off-label use is specifically mentioned in the reported verbatim information. An intentional deviation from the product information originates, if this originates from the patient or consumer and happens in the therapeutic setting, we classify this as an intentional product misuse. If the deviation does not occur in the context of the therapeutic use of the product, the deviation is classified as drug abuse or drug addiction dependence. If the unapproved product use is unintentional, accidental, This can also be caused by both the healthcare professional or patient consumer. If this occurs in the context of the therapeutic use of the relevant product, it is classified as a medication or product use error. You may now argue that in many cases, especially in pharmacovigilance, it is not clear whether such a deviation was intended or unintended. And here you can see an example for such a scenario. It is reported that the patient took an extra tablet before going to bed. If no further information is available, we just don't understand the background. Did the patient misunderstand the doctor's instructions or the package leaflet? This would then represent a medication error. Or did the doctor mistakenly give her the wrong schedule with a prescription? This would also represent a medication error, in this instance, a prescribing error. Or is the patient's discomfort getting worse at bedtime, and so she decided to take one more tablet? This scenario would constitute an intentional drug misuse. Or did the doctor decide to use the drug off-label because he was convinced that the treatment would be more effective this way? So our case information does not allow for any of these classifications. So what can be done when getting similar reports for coding purposes and when no further information can be obtained? Now, for such coding scenarios, MedDRA contains very vague, non-specific PTs. If it is not clear, if you are unsure whether such an event happened by mistake or intentionally, a suitable LLT under the PT product use issue can be used, a very general term. And if it is not clear whether an intentional deviation from proper product use happens for therapeutic reasons, a suitable LLT under PT intentional product use issue can be selected. So these are the two more general terms that you can use if you don't have the complete information for more detailed classification. So the flowchart shown before must therefore be expanded with these two neutral, more general terms shown before. And you can see the question marks here. So if it cannot be clarified whether an intentional deviation from the label by the patient happens for therapeutic reasons or not, an appropriate LLT under PT intentional product use issue should be assigned. And if it cannot be clarified whether an unapproved product use by an HCP or patient consumer occurred by mistake or intentionally, an appropriate LLT under the PT product use issue should be assigned. So this is now the amended high-level classification. These two quite vague terms that I've just shown you are not the only ones that you can use. You may also find other more vague terms, for those more specific even than those that are also vague, that you can use for dose or schedule deviation, which are, so to speak, neutral because they do not contain the information accidental or intentional. They can be chosen in combination with other MedDRA terms for intentional misuse, off-label use, or medication errors, and allow us to capture the details of what actually happened when no suitable combination term can be found in MedDRA. And in the screenshot from the MedDRA browser, you can see some of these neutral PTs, like, for instance, extra dose administered, or inappropriate schedule of product administration, or incorrect dosage administered, or incorrect dose administered, product administered to patient of inappropriate age, product administration interrupted, or product dose omission issue. So these PTs do not contain the information accidental or intentional. So they are more vague they can be used in combination with other LLTs in order to capture the full information of what has been reported. Any questions so far, Jane?
Only one question that you've covered there, Carol Ann, that if the patient takes 2 pills daily instead of 1, but you don't know if they're aware of the recommended dose, what would you code? And you've just answered that you've got a product use issue, or you've just shown us the incorrect dose administered.
Yeah.
Now that's all for now. Thank you, Carol Ann.
Thank you, Jane. So in order to search for and select suitable MedDRA terms for verbatims that relate to unapproved product use, so deviation from the approved product information, the label, it is relevant to really understand MedDRA structure and rules and the details of the points to consider guidance documents. But it is also important to make yourself familiar with the MedDRA hierarchy, so with the MedDRA browsing tools of the MSSO or your own in-house MedDRA browsers. And I will now use the web-based browser to show you where to find the relevant terms and make you familiar with the hierarchy. So let me switch screens here. And again, visit here the MedDRA website, and you have a shortcut to the web-based browser over here on the top. If I click on it, here we are. You have to enter your MedDRA ID and a password, and then you can log in. And I will not explain the MedDRA browser. This would be too much for today. So for that, you have to visit or join one of the other webinars. I will just really focus on the medication error terms. So what we can see here in the Explore window are the system organ classes. And the important one for our topic today is the SOC injury, poisoning, and procedural complications. If I click on this plus sign, I find the HLGT medication errors and other product use errors and issues. I also find the HLGT off-label uses and intentional product misuses, use issues, and a separate HLGT for overdoses and underdoses, NEC, not elsewhere classified. So these are the relevant HLGTs in the system organ class. If I now open the first one, medication errors and other product use errors and issues, I see the hierarchy here, the HLTs, and you see that the accidental exposures to product are grouped in this HLGT. So if a nurse splashes medication into her eye during preparation of a medication for administration, this would be an accidental exposure. Or if a child is taking the medication of the mother because it thinks these are sweets or so, these are accidental exposures. We are not talking about accidental exposures today. We are talking about medication errors, product use errors, and issues. And you see that the HLTs represent the stages in the medication process where the errors or issues occur. Administration, dispensing, monitoring, preparation, prescribing, selection, storage, transcribing, and communication issues. So these are the HLTs, and there is one HLT, medication errors, product use errors and issues, NEC, not elsewhere classified. So here you'll find PTs that do not fit into any of these other HLTs because no stage, for instance, is mentioned in the term, in the PT or LLT name. If I open the product administration errors and issues, you now see the granularity and why it is so important to get yourself familiar with the nomenclature, with the naming of these PTs. You see that we have, for instance, the product administration error, so a very vague term. If you don't have more information, then you can use it. You have also very specific ones, product administered by wrong person at an inappropriate site, poor quality product administered, so very, very specific term, incorrect route, incorrect product formulation administered, incorrect product dosage form administered. So these are really very specific terms, and it's always useful to use the MedDRA concept description. You'll find them here on the top. If you click on it, you can see that it's not definitions, it's the explanation on how these terms are classified and used in MedDRA. And you find the abuse, the explanation how abuse is interpreted and classified in MedDRA, also addiction, and so it's especially for the medication errors and the product use issues. Check the MedDRA concept descriptions, because it's really helpful to be able to better understand the granularity of the terms that you will find in these HLTs. So let me show you some of the concept descriptions. We saw abuse already. So here they are sorted in alphabetical order. If I choose the M now, then you will find the medication error concept description, exactly what we saw on the slide previously. And also the misuse. It is reflecting what we have discussed before. Off-label use, here it is, same story. Overdose. For the purposes of term selection and analysis of MedDRA-coded data, overdose is more than the maximum recommended dose in quantity and/or concentration. In other words, an excessive dose. And now let us look for the underdose. Here's the underdose concept description. For the purposes of term selection and analysis of MedDRA-coded data, underdose is the administration of less than the minimum recommended dose in quantity and/or concentration. And just to show you why it is so important to really refer to these concept descriptions, dose and dosage, you may think, well, that's the same. It's not. Dose is considered a quantity to be administered at one time, such as a specified amount of medication, so one dose. Whereas dosage includes the regulation of the size, so the dose, the frequency of the dose administration, the schedule, and the number of doses, so the length of the therapy. So big difference between dosage and dose. Dose much more specific, much more narrow. Dosage much more broad, including not only the dose but also schedule and duration of the therapy, the administration of the doses. So just to make you aware that this is really a very helpful source of information. So here you see the hierarchy, off-label uses and intentional product misuses, use issues. Intentional product misuses, remember, by the patient, conscious decision for therapeutic reasons. Intentional product use issues you can use if it's not clear whether an intentional decision by a patient occurs for therapeutic reasons. And here are the off-label uses as well. And the overdoses, underdoses. What we didn't find yet here in this injury SOC are the addictions and dependencies, drug dependence. And this you will find in the SOC psychiatric disorders, in the HLGT psychiatric disorders NEC, not elsewhere classified again. And here you see the HLT substance-related and addictive disorders. And here is the drug abuse, drug dependence, different antepartum, postpartum. Here you will find the relevant terms for the abuse and dependence if you get such a report. So let me switch back to my slides. And here again a reminder of the concept descriptions that I've shown you, and the hierarchy of the relevant terms in SOC injury and also in SOC psychiatric disorders. Now, what kind of terms can we find under HLGT medication errors and other product use errors and problems? I've shown you some. We can find PTs for certain types of errors, such as wrong drug, wrong patients, or wrong route. They can be selected together with, for example, PT prescribing error if no combination term is available. And terms that link an error to a stage in the medication use process, such as the prescribing stage. In addition, there are terms for intercepted errors, prevented by third-party intervention so that they didn't reach the patient. MedDRA also contains two PTs that describe the possibility, the potential of an error, or signal a circumstance that could potentially lead to a medical device use error or medication error. As well as the vague PTs that I've already addressed, which can be used when it is unclear whether the reported incident was due to an error or happened intentionally, or when it is unclear whether an intentional deviation from the label by the patient or consumer occurred in the context of therapeutic use. Now it's your turn again. Next poll question. Based on what you've just heard, how would you code this reported incident? Dose taken was below the minimum recommended dose in the product label. Can we consider this an underdose? Remember the concept description for underdose that we just saw in the MedDRA browser. So which LLT would you select for this verbatim? Underdose, drug administration error, accidental underdose, or incorrect dosage administered? What would you do? Look at the verbatim, what information, the three criteria that you need: intentional or accidental, caused by whom, and for a therapeutic purpose or not, and then select the most specific PT that you can see here. See you voting. So most of you are voting for underdose, others for drug administration error. So we are not told that there was an administration. We are just told that it was taken. Yes, administration is correct, but we have much more. Drug administration error would be much too vague. We have more specific information. The dose taken was below the minimum recommended dose, and we are not told that it was this was an error. So we don't know whether it was intentional or accidental. Accidental underdose. So most of you are going for underdose, and this is completely right. Remember the concept description for underdose. Underdose is the administration of less than the minimum recommended dose in quantity and or concentration. So what is reported is definitely an underdose, and we don't know whether this underdose was taken accidentally or intentionally. That is why we have to select a vague term that is LLT underdose and not the accidental underdose. And it is not a dosage error. Based on the concept descriptions, the term dosage refers to the determination and regulation of the size, frequency, and number of doses. So a much broader term that does not only cover dose deviations, but also administration schedule and duration. And as I've already mentioned, that drug administration error is much too vague, and it includes the information error, and this was not reported. So well done, most of you. Next one. Inadvertently took excessive dose of the prescribed pills. Here it is reported that a patient inadvertently took an excessive dose. Now, how would you code this one? Would you select incorrect dose administered, overdose, accidental dose increase, or accidental overdose? What would you do? It doesn't seem to work. Doch, yeah. Now I see you voting. Let's see what you're going for. Accidental overdose, most of you are voting for that. Yes, accidental. Here we know it was an inadvertent incident. Accidental dose increase includes the information accidental, but we are told that it was an excessive dose of the prescribed pills. And based on the concept description, this is exactly representing an overdose. So accidental overdose is really the correct code assignment here. So most of you have selected the correct option here, accidental overdose. Any questions, Jane, before continuing?
No. They're only about off-label use, Caroline. Nothing else. There's a few others, but
Yeah.
nothing else. Off-label use is coming. Anyone who's got questions about that?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay, then let me continue. We have now made ourselves familiar with the classification of medication errors and other types of product use issues. Now let's have a look at some general principles of coding medication errors. First, just a short reminder regarding the basic rules to be followed for coding with MedDRA. The quality of the reported information and the extraction of the relevant information during data entry are, of course, basic requirements for good and meaningful coding. If the information received is vague or ambiguous, of poor quality, ask for clarification. That's the first. Coding is then done at the LLT level, and the LLT that most accurately, most specifically reflects the reported incidents and events should always be selected. Nothing should be interpreted, added, and no relevant information should be omitted when coding. So this is the basic coding rule, code as reported. And of course, only current LLTs should be used for coding. And I assume that you are all very familiar with these basic rules, so I will not go into these any further. For coding product use errors and problems, the following tips may be helpful. First and foremost, you should be familiar with the MedDRA concept descriptions and the points to consider guidances so that you know where to find more detailed information, more guidance to achieve accurate and consistent coding. You should also have a good knowledge of the MedDRA structure and hierarchy, particularly in SOC injury, poisoning, and procedural complications. Once you have found a potentially appropriate LLT and PT for the reported incident, check if the placement of the selected LLT and PT accurately reflects the reported event. This is also a basic coding rule. It is best to search the MedDRA hierarchy top-down when coding medication errors and other product use concepts, unless you are already very experienced in coding such incidents. And finally, if you can't find a specific term for medicines, vaccines, or medical devices, look out for a product term that would be suitable for your coding task. So replace drug by product or device by product. The companion document specifies some principles for coding medication and other product use errors. When to use the PT medication error, when to select more than one term when to apply split coding, when to use the PT off-label use, how to capture potential and intercepted medication errors, how to capture both the specific type of error and the stage of the medication use system where the error occurred, when to capture the contributing factor leading to medication errors, and that we should not infer a medication error. And we will address them one by one now. The first principle refers to the use of PT medication error. As coders, we should not use this term unless we have no further information reported in the case. If you have further information, then search the hierarchy under HLGT medication errors and other product use errors and issues and select the most specific LLT that you can find. And if a specific error is reported but not suitable term can be found, then please submit a change request to get a better term and assign the LLT that represents the best, so to say, approximation to the reported incident as a placeholder. So one of the most frequently seen errors when it comes to medication error, product use issue coding is that the coding is not as specific as it could be based on the broad range of terms that you can find in MedDRA, so that only administration error is coded, although more information is in the case that it was deviation in the dose or schedule or duration. So this is a complaint also of regulators that the coding for in this area is too unspecific. So please always try to code as specifically as possible, because otherwise also data analysis, subsequent data analysis cannot be as efficient as it could be if you would really select the most specific, the most accurate terms that you can find in the terminology. Here an example. If it is only reported that a patient inadvertently didn't use the medication as prescribed, but no further information is available, then of course LLT, medication error, can be selected, which is grouped under the same PT, medication error. But only then. Always try to code as specifically as possible. And of course, if you get an unspecific report, you would try to get more information, to be more specific in your coding. But if you don't get additional information, then of course you are restricted and can only code medication error. Sometimes you will get a report of a chain of events where an initial error leads to additional consequent errors or even adverse events in the patient. Then code the initial error as the priority, and all resulting errors and adverse events have to be coded in addition as reported. But please do not use multiple LLTs to represent one singular incident that is reported with both a general and a specific description in the reported term. So if you have a report on an administration error that is then specified as that incorrect dose was administered, you would not split code and assign administration error and incorrect dose administered, because this would be redundant. You would always code as specifically as possible. And this is also in line with the general rule for coding of combination terms that refer to a general medical disorder that is further specified. As an example, if an arrhythmia is reported that is specified as atrial fibrillation in a given verbatim, one would only code the atrial fibrillation and not code the cardiac arrhythmia in addition. So this also applies for these coding scenarios here. Again, an example for this principle: it is reported that a nurse miscalculated the dose and the patient received 40 milligram instead of 20 milligram of his medication, and he then experienced severe hypotension. So this is a chain of events. We would capture the initial error with the LLT dose calculation error, same PT, plus the resulting administration error with the increased dose administered, again same in PT is incorrect dose administered. And we would also, of course, also code the resulting adverse event in the patient, the hypotension, same PT. Again, it is a chain of events starting with a dose calculation error that leads to an administration of an incorrect dose and finally to an adverse reaction in the patient, a hypotension. Any questions for this example, Jane?
No, Caroline, very quiet today on questions.
Yes, unusual. The next principle refers to off-label use, and I heard that some of you had questions in this regard. So always consider the criteria and information required to select a term under PT off-label use. Off-label use relates to situations where a healthcare professional intentionally prescribes, dispenses, or recommends a product for a medical purpose, not in accordance with the authorized product information. So it has to be an HCP, it has to be intentional and for medical purposes. So in the context of therapeutic use. These are the three criteria that must be met for the high-level classification. And the highlighted sentence was adapted in the latest version of the MTS PTC, MedDRA Term Selection Points to Consider document, and related guidance can also be found in the Points to Consider companion document. As a coder, off-label use terms should only be selected when off-label use is specifically mentioned in the reported verbatim information. Coders should not take this decision when only the three criteria intentional for a medical purpose by HCP are met, because it needs more specific product knowledge and information about the country of origin of the reported case. Local regulations and the product information may differ between regulatory regions. So try to obtain clarification, but if no further information can be obtained, do not infer that off-label use occurred. And regulators are really very clear on this. And you'll see that in all examples of off-label use in the Points to Consider documents, the off-label use is clearly named in the wording. So you may now argue and say, well, why I'm coding in the case, I'm only coding local cases. If you are working in the pharmaceutical industry, you may say, well, we only have 3 products. I'm also only coding local cases. I'm fully aware. I have been trained on the label. I know how to classify something as off-label use. So if you have such situation and you are trained and you have access to the label and can clearly classify something as off-label use, you may do so. But then this needs to be documented in documents about working procedures, etc. In terms of responsibility, training needs to be documented to really show that you are able to classify something as off-label use. But often coders are only working in a centralized coding environment, coding all the cases on a global basis. They even don't know the country of origin of a specific case, so they are not able to really classify something as off-label use. They don't know the label, they don't know the country, so that is why this restriction was added to the Points to Consider documents, just to let you know.
So that was the question we had, Caroline. I'll read you the question and I believe it's covered. If someone reports an adverse event or a special situation related to one of our products and we realize that based on our company's SMPC, it is also off-label use, then should we code it as off-label use? I believe just address that one with only if you're really 100% sure and you've been trained on it.
Yeah, SMPC, it's a summary of product characteristics. The label may differ. So that's exactly the problem. Yeah.
And then the follow-up to that was, if the reporter reports a lack of drug effect and then in the SMPC it's off-label, what would you code then?
Yeah, again, SMPC does not mean that all labels are exactly reflecting the SMPC. And there may be deviations in the label for specific countries you may not be aware of. So you really have to be able to access this information. You have to be more or less a product expert in order to classify something as off-label use.
Thank you, Caroline.
So in my previous company, really the product experts were responsible for classifying something as off-label use exactly for that reason, because we had so many products and on a global level that coders in a central coding organization, and we had a central coding organization, were not able to classify this. So here we have an example again. It is reported that a pediatrician decided to use COVID-19 vaccine off-label for his 10-year-old high-risk patient, although not yet approved for this age group. So does this verbatim fulfill the criteria for classification as off-label use? And is off-label use explicitly mentioned? Well, HCP has caused the deviation. It was a pediatrician. He did it intentionally. He decided to do so, and based on therapeutic considerations. He wanted to protect his 10-year-old patients from an infection. And we are told that he decided to use the COVID-19 vaccine off-label, meaning that the vaccine is approved for immunization against COVID-19 infection in the respective country, but not for this age group. So the most specific LLT for this scenario is LLT off-label use in unapproved age group under PT off-label use. Any further questions regarding off-label use, Jane?
This one, if in an SMPC is documented to be administered every 3 weeks and the investigator gives it every 4 weeks, is that off-label use? Well, no, that's the same again, isn't it? We can't make any assumption.
We cannot make but investigator so an investigator is again something different. If you have a clinical study, a phase 3 study, then usually you don't have a label yet. So then you have a study protocol, and it is defined what needs to be done, how the investigational product needs to be administered, and if the investigators are trained, if the investigator then does something different, then it's not off-label use. It would rather be a medication error in this instance, because he's deviating from the study protocol, risking, and it's a drop-off in the study of the patient. It's an invalid case.
If both off-label use and lack of drug effect are clearly reported, what should we code? Should we code drug ineffective for unapproved indication?
How was the start, Jane? I didn't get it.
If both off-label use
Yes.
and lack of drug effect are clearly reported, what should we code? Should we code drug ineffective for unapproved indication? But you haven't mentioned the indication in the question.
Yeah, you don't know.
Just told us it's off-label. You haven't said it's necessarily the indication that's off-label.
It must not be the indication. Could be the age group or a different dosage or a different schedule whatsoever. So
if you knew that it was the different indication, Caroline, would you select that one?
If it's reported as off-label, yes, off-label. I would select off-label use in unapproved indication, and then drug ineffective in unapproved indication.
So you choose the off-label use for unapproved indication, off-label for the indication, and then you just code lack of drug effect. You wouldn't link the other. I know what you mean. Is it necessary? There's a question I don't really understand. Is it about? Let me just go through. In the example mentioned, off-label was missing. Could we code off-label in unapproved indication? No, this is the example you've got here.
Yeah, no, that's exactly what explained. So you need to have this information in the report, in the case report, or in the verbatim, in order to be able to go to off-label use. Unless your processes, your working procedures, everything that is documented, SOPs whatsoever, allow coders to classify this, because you only have a limited number of products, and coders are just coding local cases. Then they may be familiar with the local label in a way that they can make this decision. But this needs to be documented then, and it also needs to be documented that they have been trained appropriately in order to take this decision. And as I mentioned, so regulators are really clear on this, that you need to have this information about the country of origin. You have to have access to the local label in order to take this decision.
Thank you, Caroline. You've been very clear. So I think in the interest of time, we need to move on. If anyone's not clear, I would suggest you listen back to the recording when we post it on Friday, because you have explained it, Caroline.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jane. So let's continue. Principle number 4 refers to potential medication errors. Such incidents should also be captured, and MedDRA has 2 PTs for doing so. PT circumstance or information capable of leading to medication error, and PT circumstance or information capable of leading to device use error. In addition, MedDRA terms that help capturing the contributing factors should be selected, like for instance, LLT drug label lookalike. Why do some regulators want to receive this information, are actually really keen to receive such information? Well, in such scenarios, no medication error happened yet, but could of course occur in the near future based on the reported contributing factors like drug name confusion, etc. When understanding the background for these potential errors, regulators can take steps to prevent errors even before happening. So depending on your local regulatory requirements, do not omit such information, but capture all relevant information when receiving similar verbatims, and code both the potential for an error by selecting one of these PTs, and also code the contributing factor or factors. Here again an example for this principle. A pharmacist reported that the blurred print on the drug label could lead to a medication error, that a wrong dose could be administered. No medication error occurred yet, but the pharmacist saw a circumstance, the blurred print on the label, that could lead to this error in the future. So remember, we would code the potential error by selecting LLT potential for medication error, wrong dose. You see, again, a specific LLT for this scenario. Under PT circumstance or information capable of leading to medication error. And we would also code the contributing factor that could lead to a medication error. Here, the blurred print on the label. By selecting LLT product label text illegible, and this is grouped under product label issue, so a product quality issue. Any questions referring to this example, to this principle, Jane? Nothing? Okay, then I continue. Next principle. Sometimes medication errors at an earlier stage of the medication use process are prevented from reaching the patient or consumer. So a medication error occurred during prescription, preparation of the medication, etc., but is detected and intercepted by an active intervention of another person, so it does not reach the patient. When such scenarios are reported, the selected term for the intercepted error should represent the stage where the error actually occurred, not where it was prevented, of course. Meaning that when it is reported that a pharmacist dispensed the wrong drug, but the nurse identified the error before giving it to the patient, we would select LLT intercepted drug dispensing error, under PT intercepted product dispensing error, capturing the stage where the error actually occurred. We would not code to LLT intercepted administration error because the nurse did nothing wrong. The error occurred at the dispensing stage, and this needs to be captured. Again, questions, Jane? If not, I continue.
Sorry, Caroline, I was on mute. There's just one here that I came in just before. I was trying to make sense of. Regarding a potential medication error, if the patient hasn't used the drug and a consumer contacts and asks if they can take a drug, which is contraindicated, and we don't know if the physician knew or not that it was contraindicated, we don't know anything about why it was prescribed, the drug patient hasn't taken it, they ring up for advice. Is that an event or not?
So if it was described,
it was prescribed.
It was
seems like it was prescribed, but we don't know if it was intentional or accidental prescribing. So it was prescribed. It was contraindicated, but it wasn't taken.
Yeah, it's an error made by it's a deviation from the label by the physician.
Yes,
I would capture this. It's a contraindicated drug prescribed.
So it's a prescribing error.
It's a prescribing.
Intercepted. Is that intercepted then by the patient because the patient rings up? So it's intercepted.
I wouldn't say this. So it was not as you would not code it to an administration error or so. It's just a prescribing error, and the narrative, of course, it's depending on your regulations. Usually this would not be reportable, but needs to be added to safety summary reports. But
Thank you, Caroline.
It's an incident.
That's an interesting one. Took me a while to get my head around. Thank you very much, Caroline. We'll move on. Interesting question.
Yeah, because it may have maybe it's a monitoring error. So if it's contraindicated because of a disease of the patient whatsoever, so it's rather to be assumed that it's an error made by the physician. Maybe it's due to contradicting or not very informative label whatsoever. So this needs to be captured. So we already talked about the stages of the medication use system and looking into the HLGT medication errors and other product use errors and issues and the MedDRA hierarchy underneath. This slide shows the different stages, starting with the storage of the medication, prescribing stage, transcribing communication stage, the preparation stage, dispensing stage, administration stage, and after that, the monitoring stage. And one of the principal MedDRA coding rules, code as specifically as possible, capturing the full information of what has been reported, also applies to coding of medication errors, of course, meaning that if a specific error is reported that occurred at a specific stage of the medication use process, we should capture the full information, the type of error, and the stage where the error occurred. You'll see that MedDRA contains many terms that capture both the type of error and the stage, like for instance LLT wrong drug prescribed. Others only capture the type of error, like wrong drug or wrong dose. So if the stage where the error occurred is unknown, you can just select the LLTs for the type of error. And others capture the stage only, like LLT drug prescribing or LLT drug dispensing, drug prescribing error or drug dispensing error. Again, if the error is not specified, you would just select an LLT to capture the stage where the error occurred. So I always try to capture both the stage and the type of error where it is known. And if the stage is not known, capture the type of error only, or if the type of error is unknown, capture the stage only. When both the stage and the type of error are reported, you would look for a combination term in MedDRA and use a single LLT to capture the full information, if possible, as shown in the first example here. When it is reported that the pharmacy dispensed the wrong drug dispensed would capture the full information. There is no need to assign two codes like wrong drug and LLT drug dispensing error. You capture the full information with a LLT wrong drug dispensed. But sometimes you may not find a suitable combination term. If it is reported that a doctor mistakenly prescribed the wrong strength, you would have to split to capture the reported information in full by assigning LLT wrong strength and LLT drug prescribing error. So always try to capture both. We already shortly addressed the contributing factors when talking about potential medication errors. If a medication error is reported in conjunction with the actual cause of this error, then always select a term for the contributing factor plus the resulting error. Remember what we have discussed earlier. Contributing factors are critical to understand why an error occurred and to identify interventions that can be undertaken to prevent this error. And that is why many regulators are very interested in obtaining information about these contributing factors. The next example describes such a case. A doctor wrote a prescription for 40 milligrams of drug X for angina pectoris every 6 hours. But because of the illegibility of the prescription, as you can see here, the nurse administered the same dose of drug Y, a calcium channel blocker used in the treatment of hypertension, for which the maximum daily dose is only 10 milligrams. So because of the error made, the patient received 160 milligrams of this calcium channel blocker per day, 4 times 40 milligrams. And a day after taking the first 4 overdoses of the calcium channel blocker, the patient suffered a heart attack and died. So what needs to be captured here? At first, of course, the underlying disease and indication for use, the angina pectoris, then the eligible written prescription, the resulting medication error, the administration of the wrong drug, and the accidental overdose, and the resulting adverse reaction in the patient, the heart attack. Remember, it is really important to capture the contributing factor or factors if reported, like here. The next slide shows the last principle that we will discuss today: do not infer a medication error. Remember another basic rule for coding with MedDRA: code as reported. Do not add or subtract relevant medical information. The same rule also applies to the coding of medication errors. If you receive a verbatim that describes a deviation from the label, an unauthorized use of the product, only select an LLT or LLTs that reflect what has been reported. Do not assume that a medication or device use error occurred if this is not made clear in the verbatim. So if it is reported that a nurse administered 50 milligrams of drug X, do not assume that this is a medication error. Try to obtain more information from the reporter or find out the dose range referencing the prescribing information of the respective drug. Any further questions before continuing, Jane?
Just a little question, Caroline. What's medication strength? You talked about a term, wrong strength.
Wrong strength. Let's make a try and see whether we find something in the const strength, whether it's here. Here. Refers to a concentration of active ingredient found in a particular dosage form. So you see that these terms are really the concept descriptions are really useful. These are really pharmaceutical pharmaceutical terms not every body is familiar with. So it's really useful to refer to the concept descriptions. Otherwise, you will have to refer to reliable references on the internet. So here we found something. Any further question?
Yes, there's one here about what you've coded here. Why was angina pectoris included?
Well,
and
just for completeness, it has nothing to do with the actual medication error, but it was reported in this case, and that's why we have included it, just for completeness.
When and why would we code therapy cessation by a healthcare professional?
Oh, we will come to this later on, but I cannot take every specific question
Okay.
now, because otherwise we will not make it. Yeah.
That's everything then. Thank you.
Thank you. So this is just a nice summary, a nice visual presentation of the different types of medication error cases taken from the Good Practice Guide of the EMA. In the first example, a medication error occurs. Here's the error, and leading to an administration error, so it reaches the patient, and to harm in the patient. Next, an error happens as well and reaches the patient, but the patient does not experience any harm, no adverse events. Next, an error occurred, but it was intercepted from reaching the patient. And here, a potential error is described. So there is a potential for an error, no error occurred yet, and of course couldn't reach the patient or cause any harm. So these are the scenarios that we have been talking about before. So now in the last part of this webinar, we will work together on 5 examples. We will use the previously introduced decision chart and also apply the general principles for coding medication errors and other product use concepts that we just discussed. At first, you will have to assess the reported information, like always. First, check for the 3 criteria for the classification. Did the incident occur intentionally or unintentionally? Who has caused it? Was there a therapeutic purpose? Was it in the context of the therapeutic use of this product? Then check at which stage the error occurred and whether it led to consequent errors and even harm to the patient. If contributing factors are reported, they need to be captured in addition. Or was the report referring to circumstance that could lead to a medication error? Or was the error intercepted before reaching the patient? Because the type of report, the type of information that you get will influence the way you search for appropriate terms in MedDRA. And it will help you to find the most suitable LLTs, the closest matches. Now here is our first example. It is reported that the nurse forgot to administer the second of 2 chemotherapy treatments to the patient. So what can we take from this report? Is it reported whether it was accidental or intentional? Yes, we know that the incident happened accidentally. The nurse forgot. Do we know who caused it? Click yes, an HCP, of course, a nurse. And was it in the framework of therapeutic use of the product? Again, it was. We also know the stage where the error occurred, but no information about a contributing factor was provided. Now, how would you approach this report? Which LLT would you select? Nurse forgot to administer the second dose of chemotherapy to the patient. Scheduled daily dosing, taken less frequently, drug dose omission in error, drug use for unapproved schedule, temporary interruption of therapy. What would you do? See you voting. Let's see what you're going for. Most of you are voting for drug dose omission in error, but some of you also temporary interruption of therapy, drug dose omission. So let me close the poll here. And let us use our decision chart in order to better understand what was actually reported. So most of you are going in the right direction here. Well done. We know that the incident occurred in error. The nurse forgot. We know that it was caused by the nurse. And we know that it occurred in the framework of therapeutic use of the chemotherapy of the patient. So the incident has to be classified as a medication error, and we will have to find the most specific term in order to capture this medication error. Now, let's have a look into the MedDRA browser again. Let me switch screens again, and let us look into let me first collapse everything and restart the top-down search here. Injury, poisoning, procedural complications, medication errors, and other product use errors. So it is an administration error. So we would search in the product administration errors and issues HLT. And if I look into this HLT, I will find, what do we have? Product dose omission. Here it is, product dose omission in error. If I click on the plus sign, drug dose omission in error would be the most specific term that we can find for the reported scenario, for this reported incident. You see that there is a product dose omission issue, so a more vague term when you don't know whether this occurred intentionally or accidentally. You would use the product dose omission issue PT, so the most specific LLT underneath, like missed dose, product dose omission, vaccine dose omission, whatsoever. So what about the other options? So this would be the correct code assignment here, drug dose omission in error. Drug use for the inappropriate schedule. We had one, here we have the inappropriate schedule of product administration. And when would you use one of these LLTs here, like drug dose administration interval too long, too short, whatsoever? So these would be selected inappropriate schedule of product administration when it is reported that dose omissions occur regularly, take place more often, like when a patient takes a once daily dose less frequently. So schedule issues occur regularly. Here we had a report of one dose that was omitted. So it's not a schedule issue. And the other term that we had was drug use for unapproved schedule. Unapproved schedule. Here we are. It's grouped under this very vague term, product use issue. If I click on this PT, you see it is in medication errors, product use errors, and issues NEC. So it's not representing an administration error. It would be much too vague for the reported scenario because we know that it was an administration error. And what now about therapy interruptions? Similar to what the question that we had before with the therapy cessation, therapy interruption. Therapy interruption, temporary interruption of therapy. If I click on it, right mouse click, go to browser, you see it's in surgical, in the surgical SOC. Here we are. Temporary interruption of therapy. So you would only use this therapy interrupted if it's for medical reason, when therapy was interrupted temporarily because of a planned surgery of the patient. So it has nothing to do with errors or issues in the medication process. It's a conscious decision. It's a medical decision. It's to interrupt this therapy. It's a different concept. And that's why this PT, also the cessation, should only be used when a therapy was interrupted or terminated due to reasons that are not under the control of the HCP or patient consumer, like supply, insurance, or financial issues, or when it's really necessary for medical reasons for the patient because of a surgery whatsoever. Let me switch back. Here we are. So here again, the options that you had. So drug dose omission and error would be the correct code assignment for this verbatim. Any questions, Jane?
No, Caroline, there's one that if there's time at the end.
Okay. Next example, here it is reported that the patient did not read instructions thoroughly and took drug X for prophylaxis instead of treatment of the approved indication. So what again do we know based on the information provided? Is it reported whether it was accidental or intentional? Yes, we know that the incident happened accidentally. The patient did not read the instructions thoroughly enough. Do we know who caused it? Yes, the patient. And was it in the framework of therapeutic use of the product? Yes, it was. We also know the stage where the error occurred. The drug was administered. He took the drug, and no contributing factor was reported. We know that the patient didn't read the instructions thoroughly, but we don't know why, whether he was under stress, distracted, whatsoever. Now again, your turn. How would you approach this reported incident? Would you select LLT, drug use for unapproved indication, unintentional use for unapproved indication, product leaflet instructions, confusion, off-label use in unapproved indication, or would you select drug administration error? What would you do? I see you voting. Unintentional use for unapproved indication seems to be favored selection. Let me close the poll and again use our decision chart again to classify the incident first. We know that the incident happened accidentally again. Patient did not read instructions thoroughly enough. Here we are. We know that it was caused by the patient, and we know that it was in the context of therapeutic use. He thought that this was for prophylaxis. So meaning that this verbatim describes a medication error. And we have to look for the most specific term in order to capture this medication error in the browser. So now let me switch again and use the search field here in this instance. And I will look for indication and admin in order to find a suitable term. Indication, admin, nothing. No typo. I don't find anything. Okay, then let me look for use instead. So be a bit more vague and search. And here we have now some more specific unintentional use for unapproved indication. If I click on it, I can see the hierarchy here. It's under medication errors, product use errors, and issues, NEC, because the stage is not captured here. It's not captured that this is really, that the drug was finally administered unintentionally for an unapproved indication. We also have product use in unapproved, drug use for unknown indication, drug use for unapproved indication. We know it was accidentally, so unintentional use for unapproved indication would be the best approximation here. But we would have to capture the fact that it was administered as well. Remember, one of the principles, we have to capture the specific error and the stage where the error occurred. So with the LLT unintentional use for unapproved indication, we very specifically capture the error made, but we don't capture the fact that it was actually administered. So that's why we have to select drug administration error in addition. Here it is, drug administration error, same PT. And this PT is, of course, grouped under HLT product administration errors and issues because it represents the stage where the error occurred. What about off-label use in unapproved indication? This would be, of course, incorrect because the verbatim does not describe an off-label use. The error was made by the patient, and it was not a conscious decision, and it was not a conscious decision by an HCP. So it is not an off-label use. What about the product leaflet instructions confusion? If I again search in injury and in the medication errors, HLGT, here we have the HLT product confusion errors and issues. And if I look for product, you see that there's product label confusion, product name confusion, product packaging confusion. So product label confusion. If I look into it, you see that there's product leaflet instructions confusion. So this was not reported in our case. These terms do not reflect what has been reported. The patient didn't read the instructions thoroughly. It was not reported that the instructions themselves were confusing. So this would be an assumption, and that's why we would not select one of the LLTs under PT product label confusion. Here again, the options that we had. You could argue that drug administration error already captures the error, that this was a deviation that was made unintentionally, and therefore drug use for unapproved indication would also be correct. But we always try to code as specifically as possible. So unintentional use for unapproved indication is more specific. I would prefer this one, although the error is already captured. So here we are. We would code to drug administration error to cover the stage where the error occurred. And in order to capture the specific error, we would code to unintentional use for unapproved indication under the same PT.
Caroline, we have a related question here around the word use. If you're saying drug use, does use mean it was administered? Why do we capture administered as well?
No, it does not, but we want to capture the error that was made as specifically as possible. And we want to capture the fact that there was an accidental deviation from the label in terms of the indication for use, that it was unapproved. And in order to capture the fact that the drug was finally really taken for the unapproved indication, we would have to code drug administration error in addition. That's exactly why we need split coding here. Remember the principle, code as specifically, both the stage when it's known plus the type of error.
So I think the fact you've used the LLT saying drug use for unapproved indication, use is broader than just administration. Yes. So you can't assume that it's been taken when you take.
I've shown you in the hierarchy that the unintentional use for unapproved indication PT is grouped in this NEC grouping. It's not grouped under administration errors and issues.
Thank you, Caroline. I know that's a question we've had before, so it's interesting that it comes up again. then we've got a couple which don't relate to this example. So do you want to hold on to them?
I think we first have to continue, because otherwise I will not make it. I have 3 further examples to discuss, and then we can take further questions.
Okay.
Yeah. So here's the next one. A patient took more than the prescribed dose to get a better drug effect. So what are we told here? Do we know whether it was accidental or intentional? Yes. It was an intentional decision by the patient. Who has caused it? The patient. For a therapeutic purpose. He wanted to have a better drug effect. And he took it, so we know the stage. It was not just a plan. He just took it more than the prescribed dose to have a better drug effect, but no contributing factor needs to be captured. So again, your turn. Patient took more than the prescribed dose to get a better drug effect. Which LLT would you select? Unapproved dose administered, intentional overdose, wrong dose administered, intentional misuse by dose change, incorrect dosage administered. Remember the table that I've shown you before from the points to consider document for MedDRA term selection, where misuse, abuse, dependence is compared with off-label use and medication error, these concepts. Unintentional misuse by dose change is, we have intentional overdose and intentional misuse by dose change. These are the preferred options for coding. Here we are. So again, let us use our decision chart. It's really always good to think in these categories. Was it intentional or accidental? Well, here it was intentional. It was a conscious decision by the patient for therapeutic reasons, and that's why we have to classify this as an intentional product misuse and find the most specific LLT under this PT. So again, let me switch screens and do a top-down search again in SOC injury. Here we have the off-label uses and intentional product misuses use issue. We said it's a misuse by the patient, intentional misuse. And here is our PT, intentional product misuse. And now we would look for the most specific LLT that we can find, and this would be intentional misuse by dose change. And most of you voted for this one. Well done. So the other option that we had was PT intentional overdose. So you will find this in here in the overdoses and underdoses NEC. Here it is the intentional overdose. But our verbatim alone does not allow for classification as an intentional overdose. More information about the drug and the labeled dose range would be needed to do so. So it would be an assumption. And all the other options that were offered in the quiz were incorrect. Unapproved dose administered, incorrect dose administered, and incorrect dosage administered do not represent intentional drug misuse, but drug administration errors or issues. So here we really need to classify appropriately as intentional misuse. And here we are again with the correct code assignment. The other options we would code to intentional misuse by dose change under PT, intentional product misuse. So most of you were on the right path here. Well done. Questions, Jane?
Questions, Caroline. Don't we have to code overdose as well because of the intentional misuse?
No, because we don't know whether this was an overdose. He took more than the prescribed dose. Maybe the dose range was from 1 tablet to 3. this is covered by the label. And the patient was prescribed to take one tablet, and he then took 2. It's still in the dose range of the label, and that's why it's not an overdose. But it is, of course, a misuse of the drug, a dose change, intentional dose change.
If we know the maximum recommended dose, do we then need to code both overdose and intentional product misuse?
I would, because with the intentional overdose could also be something that a doctor decides to do. But here the companion document is not really clear. If you're not sure whether split coding is needed, I would rather always take the safe approach, so to say, and rather split code in order to really capture the basic concept, that is the intentional misuse by the patient plus the specific deviation from the label.
So Caroline, we've had one question. You've mentioned label a few times. What do you mean by the label? How could people, if they're not familiar, what is the label and how can they access it?
So the label is the product information in a specific country. And you may know that in the different countries, the label for the same drug may differ because of the approval of the drug. So because regulatory authorities have a different view on the drug, so the dose range may differ. In some countries, different route of administration may be approved in addition, not in the other country. So that's why the local label, a specific product information in a specific country, may differ between the countries. And that's why it's so important to have a specific knowledge about the countries and the label in the countries in order to classify off-label use, for instance.
Okay, thank you very much. Carry on then. Thank you.
Next one. Doctor prescribed drug A off-label to suppress preterm labor after careful risk-benefit assessment. So what does this verbatim tell us? We know that it was a conscious decision. We know who caused it, an HCP. It was in the framework of therapeutic use of the product. So yes. So all the criteria for classification of the incident as off-label use on high level are met. And it is also reported that the doctor used the drug off-label. We also know the stage where the issue occurred. It was at the stage of prescribing. The drug was prescribed off-label for a patient suffering preterm labor, but no contributing factor was mentioned. So what would you do with this one? Which LIT would you select when looking at the reported incident? Drug use for unapproved indication, drug prescribing error, drug prescribed for unapproved indication, off-label use in unapproved indication, and or intentional use for unlabeled indication. What would you do? Which LIT would you select, or would you split code? Let's have a look. Most of you are going for off-label use in unapproved indication. This is completely correct. It's not an error. It was a conscious decision after careful risk-benefit assessment. Always really important to look at the verbatim and fully understand what has been reported here. The drug was prescribed for an unapproved indication, but this could also relate to an error made. We know it was a conscious decision by the HCP off-label to use this drug for preterm labor. So well done. Let me close the poll and use our flowchart again, our decision chart. We know that it was a conscious decision. It was made after careful risk-benefit assessment. We also know that this decision was made by the CP, here the doctor, and we know that it was made for therapeutic purposes. So the incident can be classified as off-label use based on these three criteria, high level. And because we are also provided with the information that the doctor prescribed the drug off-label, we can select a suitable term under PT off-label use. Here it's easy going, so I can go for the off-label uses here under HLT, intentional product off-label uses and intentional product misuses use issues, HLGT. Here we have the off-label uses, and we just two PTs, off-label use and off-label use of device. And I would now select the most specific LLT that I can find here, and this is off-label use in unapproved indication. So no split coding is necessary. We can cover all the details of the off-label use with this LLT. Here we are. This would be the correct code assignment, off-label use in unapproved indication. And here, any questions, Jane? I think this is quite straightforward.
Can we assume that the patient took the medicine if you're only told that it was prescribed?
No, we cannot tell it. It's just, and it's a vague term. It's off-label use and unapproved indication, off-label use. If the patient would have taken it, you would maybe then also capture the fact that it was actually taken plus any adverse events, or that no adverse event happened to the patient. That's all that was reported.
Sorry. And then a follow-up to the other one about the label. How can we find the product information for each country?
That's exactly the problem. Usually you only have this in the regulatory departments or the product experts in pharmacovigilance or in clinical development have access to this regulatory information. Coders usually don't have it. And that's why it's so important to remember that without having this information, coders should not classify something as off-label use.
Thank you, Caroline. There's another, again, about the label. The label, the SMPC and the product information leaflet are all different, aren't they?
Yes, they are.
So they're not all the same.
No.
Thank you.
Small. Of course, it's not great differences. So the SMPC is a summary of product characteristics. You have but the local label in different countries, in Africa, Australia, Japan, may be different. Yeah.
And then there's a question about why you haven't chosen an LLT that talks about a prescription error. That's because you've used off-label use, yes. Isn't it?
Yes, yeah, so it's not an error. It's not an error. It's a conscious decision for therapeutic reasons. It's an off-label use in unapproved indication.
Thank you.
So last one. For today, it is reported that the doctor mixed up the drug names because they look similar and prescribed the wrong medication. So what can we take from this one? Do we know whether this was accidental or intentional? Yes, we know that it was accidental. We know who caused it. It was the doctor, and it was in the context of therapeutic use of the product. We also know the stage where the error occurred. It was the prescribing stage, and a contributing factor for this error was also reported in this case. So which LLT or LLTs would you select to capture the full information of this verbatim? Doctor mixed up the drug names because they look similar and prescribed the wrong medication. Yeah, wrong drug prescribed, of course, captures the stage where the error occurred, and then you would also need to capture the contributing factor. In this instance, the drug names looked similar, and we find a very specific LLT here, drug name lookalike. So well done, most of you have got it right. Again, let's use our decision chart. We know that this occurred accidentally, unintentionally. We also know it was caused by the doctor in the framework of therapeutic use of the product, so a medication error. And we will again have to look for the most specific LLT to capture this. So if I enter wrong drug into the search window, then I find wrong drug dispensed, wrong drug administered, wrong drug, where is it? Prescribed. Here it is, wrong drug prescribed. So this would be the perfect term under PT product prescribing error. So the more specific term that we can find to capture both the stage where the error occurred plus the specific type of error, that a wrong drug was prescribed. So no split coding here needed for capturing the error that was made. But what about the contributing factor? So let's look into the injury SOC again, medication errors, and into the product confusion errors and issues, HLT. And here we have the product name confusion. This is exactly what happened in our case. And we find a very specific term, drug name lookalike. There's also drug name sound alike. So, but here we were told that the drug names look similar, and that's why the doctor has prescribed the wrong drug. So these two are to be selected. Here we are, wrong drug prescribed, drug name lookalike. These are the two. Wrong drug alone would be much too vague. We don't know whether it was finally administered. We only know that it was prescribed. Product confusion would be too vague. And it's not a drug prescription issue. It's clearly an error that was made by the doctor because of the fact that the drug names looked similar. Here we are, wrong drug prescribed under PT product prescribing error, and drug name lookalike under PT product name confusion. Any questions?
Yeah, we had a question about the product name confusion earlier on. So listen to this one. If drug A has the same packaging as drug B and drug C, and it was difficult to distinguish between them, what would be the appropriate coding? Is it lookalike packaging?
Yes, exactly. Here we have the product packaging confusion. Yeah, lookalike packaging would be the correct code assignment. So it's use of error-prone abbreviation, also something that occurs quite frequently. Product label confusion also when the drug label looks alike, etc. So it's worthwhile to look into very specific PTs again and LLTs that can be found under this HLT.
Thank you, Caroline. That's fine. Thank you. That's okay. Somebody's asking, yeah, prescriptions and codes. Yes, that's all so far.
Perfect. So this is a summary of what we have covered today. And yeah, this is now the last chance for questions, Jane.
So we had one question, which was, so if the patient is prescribed a drug, let me find it. If the patient is prescribed a drug and that's compatible with the condition that they've been diagnosed with, and then it's found that they have been misdiagnosed, does this mean that the original prescription was an error? My feeling on that is no.
No,
it's not.
I wouldn't think so. Yeah, because the previously made decision was based on a wrong diagnosis. Later on, you found something that was not compatible with the diagnosis, so no new diagnosis was made. But the previously taken decision was made on the fact that this was the diagnosis. This was not an error.
Yes, as I agree, Caroline. So then that's all we've had. What about therapy cessation by this is that question we had earlier about therapy cessation.
So
When would you
that's what
therapy
I addressed.
Cessation by healthcare professional.
Yes. So therapy
When
cessation it's a conscious decision for medical reasons by the doctor. As I mentioned when I was talking about temporary interruption of therapy. So if the doctor stops a medication like an anticoagulant before a surgery, this is of course not off-label use or medication error whatsoever. It's a therapy decision. That's why these terms are grouped under the surgical SOC. Yeah, it has nothing to do with the topic that we are covering today.
And I think you did cover some of that. So if you want to listen back, I thought that one was covered.
Yes.
We've got a couple more coming in, Caroline. Do you want them or if both unapproved indication and lack of effect were reported, do we need to split code to unapproved indication and drug ineffective, or is it okay to code only one LLT, drug ineffective for unapproved indication?
Drug ineffective for unapproved indication covers the whole concept. So if you can cover everything that was reported with one LLT, you don't need to split code.
If a patient's incorrectly included in a clinical trial, deviation from the inclusion-exclusion criteria, and the product was administered, is it a medication error? No,
These
no.
are very specific. No, it's a
product. That's a trial issue.
That's a trial issue. So it's a wrong recruitment of this patient.
There's no other questions relating to what we've covered today, Caroline.
Okay. So these are some useful information if you want to contact the MSSO, or also links to the MedDRA browsers offered by the MSSO. If you want to submit change request here, the link to the WebCR tool. If you would like to attend further, either face-to-face trainings or webinars, here a link to the training schedule of the MSSO and a link to the MedDRA support documentation that I've shown you on the website as well. And what may be helpful for you and useful for you is this page here. If you click on contact on the MedDRA website, this page will open and you can see that you can contact the MSSO help desk, you can follow us on social media. We have social media channels in English, Spanish, French, Russian, Indian, and also a Chinese WeChat group. We have a help desk live chat as well, and a contact form that you can use. So what may be useful for you is the YouTube channel. And let me switch screen again. And here we have the website, contact. How to use training, subscription. Did this change?
What are you looking for, Caroline?
I'm looking for the YouTube channel.
Ah, is it not on training? Training. It may have changed. It may have changed. Try on training on the training materials. Training materials.
Something is wrong with the website.
Oh dear. Well, it'll be on our YouTube channel. If you look for YouTube MSSO, it'll come up.
So obviously they are working on our website, and so if you, just to let you know, if you click on this contact, usually this opens. If you click on the YouTube icon, then you will see all the MSSO trainers and the recorded sessions of all the MSSO trainers. So coding classes, classes about data retrieval, SMQ, standardized MedDRA queries, also the medication error webinars in different languages, not only in English, also in Russian, in Spanish, in Chinese. So if you're interested to watch one of these recorded sessions, including ours today, just refer to the YouTube channel. So I don't know what happened to the website. It worked this morning. I've looked into it, but something has changed, or they're working on restructuring this website.
Maybe.
Yeah. So,
Okay, thank you, Caroline.
So yes, I hope everyone has found this webinar helpful for your work, and hopefully we can meet again in one of our other webinars or face-to-face trainings. Thank you for joining today, for your interest in our topic today, and also thank you to you, Jane, for your support, helping with all these questions and
You're
organizing
welcome.
the questions. So have
Thank
a nice
you.
rest of your day, wherever you are, and a warm goodbye to all of you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye, everyone. Bye-bye.